My fingers still trembled sometimes when I touched piano keys. It was a phantom ache, a memory of the morning I found my beloved Steinway gone. It had vanished overnight, sold to fund my sister Melody's tuition at some prestigious ballet academy. Mom's eyes, the same shade of blue as mine, couldn't meet my gaze as she whispered about necessary sacrifices and Melody's bright future. Dad stood by the fireplace, counting a stack of bills with shaking hands, muttering about my hobby versus her talent. I was 17. My acceptance letter to Juilliard, the culmination of a decade of relentless practice, lay crumpled in the kitchen trash where Melody had tossed it. She'd laughed a sound like shattering glass about my impossible dreams. They all said I'd understand someday. They said that family meant putting the gifted child first, and in their eyes, her leaps were more valuable than my sonatas. I suppose a part of me died that winter. Not the physical me, but the girl who believed in the inherent fairness of the world, in the unconditional nature of love, in the unbreakable bonds of family loyalty. She suffocated under the crushing weight of their indifference, buried beneath a mountain of point shoes and pink tulle. Now, 15 years later, I've returned, and they have no idea who I've become. The air in my hometown still tasted the same, a mix of damp earth and faded ambition. I pulled my beat-up Honda Civic, a carefully chosen prop, into the driveway of the house I grew up in. It looked smaller somehow, the paint peeling slightly at the edges, just like my memories of this place. I took a deep breath, slipping into character. I was no longer Anya, the concert pianist. I was Anya, the struggling music teacher back home with her tail between her legs. The front door creaked open before I could knock. Anya, oh my baby. Mom enveloped me in a hug that smelled of the same vanilla perfume she'd worn for 30 years. It was cloying, suffocating. She pulled back, her hands on my shoulders, her eyes scanning my deliberately drab outfit. A faded cardigan over a plain t-shirt and worn jeans. Oh, honey, you look tired. Her voice was thick with a pity that felt more like a judgment. It's been a tough few years, Mom, I said, letting my shoulders slump. I'd practiced the weary, defeated tone in front of a mirror for weeks. Well, you're home now. That's all that matters. Dad was in his usual armchair, the newspaper held up like a shield. He lowered it an inch, peering at me over the top. So, you finally decided to be realistic about life, huh? He grunted. Good. That piano nonsense was never going to pay the bills. Hi, Dad, I said, my voice small. He just grunted again and disappeared behind the sports section. Some things never change. Then, a whirlwind of lycra and entitlement descended the stairs. Look what the cat dragged in, Melody chirped. At 32, she was sleek and toned, dressed in designer workout clothes that probably cost more than my first month's rent in my fake tiny apartment. She pranced into the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of electrolyte-infused water from the fridge. Heard you were back in town, teaching little kids twinkle, twinkle, little star now, are we? It's a living, I mumbled, staring at the floor. I guess, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. She took a long, noisy sip of her water. Well, don't get too comfortable. My studio is expanding again. We just secured a new location downtown. Business is booming. People just can't get enough of quality artistic expression. She winked as if she'd just coined the phrase herself. They bought it all, the humble car, the cheap clothes, the story of failed auditions and dwindling savings. They saw exactly what they expected to see. The daughter who had peaked at 17, the failed artist, the cautionary tale they could use to further embellish the myth of Melody's brilliant success. It was perfect. The reunion dinner was as forced and uncomfortable as I knew it would be. The scent of roasted chicken filled the air, a smell that used to mean comfort but now felt like an anesthetic. Mom bustled around, refilling glasses and offering more potatoes, her movements a frantic dance of denial. You're probably grateful now, Anya, she said, spooning a lump of mashed potatoes onto my plate. Her smile was tight, strained. We knew it was for the best. Music was never going to be a stable career. Look at Melody, she has a real business. I poked at the potatoes. You're right, Mom, it was silly of me. Melody beamed from across the table, her hand resting possessively on her husband's arm. Marcus, a man whose personality was as bland as his beige sweater, nodded in agreement. Honestly, Anya, I've never gotten the appeal of classical music, he chimed in, his voice oozing a kind of smug ignorance. It's all just pretentious noise, isn't it? No beat. You can't dance to it. Marcus is right, Melody said, patting his hand. Dance is visceral. It's about passion, strength. That's why we're doing so well. We're not just a studio, we're an institution. She launched into a monologue about her expansion plans. 3 new studios across the state, all funded, she claimed, by her natural business instincts and savvy financial planning. Your sister has a real head for numbers, Dad added, finally contributing something to the conversation besides the sound of his chewing. Not like you, always with your head in the clouds. My phone vibrated in my lap. I glanced down discreetly. The screen lit up with a preview of an email from Klaus Richter. Subject, solo concerto scheduling urgent. My heart hammered against my ribs. I quickly pressed the power button, plunging the screen into darkness and shoving the phone deeper into my pocket. Everything okay, dear? Mom asked, her eyes narrowed with concern. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Just a text from my landlord, rent's due. The lie came so easily it scared me. Melody let out a little sigh of pity. Oh, Anya, if you need a little help, I'm sure we could float you a couple hundred. Consider it a family discount. The condescension was a physical thing, a thick smog in the room. I just nodded, my throat tight. Thanks, Mel, I appreciate it. I looked at their faces. My mother's feigned sympathy, my father's dismissive pride, my sister's smug superiority. They hadn't changed, and they had absolutely no remorse. A few days later, Melody insisted on giving me the grand tour of her flagship studio, Melody's Dance Dynasty. The name alone was enough to make me gag. The walls were painted a nauseating shade of lavender and were covered floor to ceiling with framed photos of her. Melody at 8 in a tutu. Melody at 12 winning a regional competition. Melody at 20 cutting the ribbon to her first studio. It was a shrine to herself. And there, in the corner of the waiting room, was my Steinway. My breath caught in my chest. It was almost unrecognizable. They had painted it a garish, glossy hot pink. Someone had glued plastic rhinestones all over the lid. It wasn't an instrument anymore, it was a prop, a grotesque piece of decoration. A small, laminated sign was propped on the music stand. This antique piano was generously donated to help fund our first generation of dancers. A symbol of true family sacrifice. I ran my fingers lightly over the keys. They were dusty and sticky. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Pretty neat, huh? Melody said, appearing at my side. It makes a great statement piece. People love the story. I just nodded, unable to speak. As she led me through the studios, I saw parents fawning over her, their faces alight with admiration. You're such an inspiration, Melody, one mother gushed. What your family did for you? It's just incredible. We all have to make sacrifices for art, Melody said with a pious smile. Later, while she was distracted by a fawning father, I overheard that same mother talking to another. Did you know her sister gave up everything so Melody could succeed? A full scholarship to Juilliard, apparently. So selfless. I wish my kids were that supportive of each other. The lie had grown, taken on a life of its own. In their version, I wasn't a victim. I was a willing martyr, a saint who had laid her dreams on the altar of her sister's ambition. While Melody was boasting to a group of parents, I slipped past her office. The door was ajar. Her desk was a chaotic mess of papers, schedules, invoices, and financial documents. From the doorway, I could see spreadsheets with columns that didn't seem to align, numbers that looked hastily altered. A folder labeled Scholarship Fund Donations was overflowing with papers, but a quick glance at the ledger next to it showed figures that were significantly smaller. The numbers didn't just not add up. They screamed fraud. I pulled the door gently shut, my mind already racing. Sarah had been my only friend, the one who sat with me on the piano bench for hours, humming along as I played. When my family turned on me, I'd assumed she was my silent ally. Now, sitting across from her in a generic coffee shop, I saw the truth in her shifting eyes and the nervous way she shredded her napkin. It's so good to see you, Anya, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was Melody's business partner now, the marketing manager for the Dance Dynasty. It's been too long. It has, I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. You and Melody have built something really impressive. Sarah's laughter was a little too loud, a little too brittle. Oh, we make a good team. She has the vision, and I handle the practical side of things. We made small talk for a few minutes, reminiscing about high school, carefully dancing around the subject of the piano. Finally, I decided to just step on the landmine. I saw the old piano at the studio, I said, watching her face carefully. It was a surprise. She stopped fiddling with her napkin. She took a deep breath and finally met my eyes. Look, Anya, about that, I know you were upset. I was 17 and my life's dream was sold out from under me. Upset is a gentle word for it. She flinched. I know, but someone had to be practical. Your parents were in a tough spot. Melody had this incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I might have helped them see that it was the logical choice. The words came out in a rush, a confession she'd clearly been holding for 15 years. I was the one who found the buyer. I told them how much they could get for it. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. It wasn't just my family. It was her, too. My best friend. Besides, she added, a smirk finally touching her lips as she regained her composure. She stirred a spoonful of sugar crystals into her latte, the sound grating on my nerves. Let's be honest. You were always too sensitive for the professional music world. It would have eaten you alive. Her words were meant to be a comfort, a retroactive justification. But all I heard was the ultimate betrayal, delivered with a syrupy smile. By the way, she said, changing the subject, her eyes bright with business-like fervor. We're in talks with some new investors. They're looking to take the Dance Dynasty national. It's all very hush-hush, but it's going to be huge. Mysterious investors, just like the odd-looking financial records. The pieces were starting to click into place. The final ghost of my past appeared in the same coffee shop a week later. David. My high school crush. The boy I'd written secret, clumsy nocturnes for. He was softer now, a little thicker around the middle, with a tired but happy look in his eyes. He was bouncing a toddler on his knee. Anya Petrova? Wow, is that really you? He asked, his face breaking into a familiar, charming grin. Hey, David, I said, smiling back. I heard you were back in town. You look great. He remembered me, all right. He remembered me as the quiet piano girl. He said it with a condescending fondness that made my skin crawl. Always tucked away in the music room? What are you up to these days? Teaching, I said, sticking to my script. That's great, really, he said, shifting the toddler to his other knee. It's probably for the best that things worked out this way. That whole professional musician life seems really stressful. Melody, on the other hand? Wow. His wife, Rebecca, a cheerful woman with a kind face, chimed in. Oh, you're Melody's sister. Her story is just so inspiring. Our daughter, Lily, takes classes at her studio. Melody is just a local hero. What she's built is incredible. They were all disciples in the Church of Melody. The entire town was her congregation. We're so proud to support her, David said. He raised his left hand to adjust his glasses, and the light caught his wedding ring. My heart stopped. It was a simple gold band, but engraved on the outer surface, so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking, was a line of musical notes. The opening notes of the first nocturne I'd ever written for him. A piece only he and I had ever heard. He had no idea. He wore a piece of my stolen soul on his finger, a relic from a life he thought was just a footnote, while praising the sister who had ripped that life away from me. The irony was so thick, so bitter, I could taste it. The second family dinner was worse than the first. The air was thick with a new kind of tension, a manic, celebratory energy that set my teeth on edge. They had news, big news. We've decided, Mom announced, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy, to sell the house. I dropped my fork. It clattered against the plate. You're what? Don't look so shocked, Anya, Melody said, rolling her eyes. It's a smart financial move. The market is high, and honestly, this place is too big for mom and dad anyway. We're moving into a lovely little two-bedroom apartment over by the bypass, Mom added. It's all we need. But why? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Dad cleared his throat, setting his steak knife down with sharp precision. Your sister needs capital for her expansion. This is the fastest way to liquidate the assets. He looked at me, his eyes cold and hard. She's building an empire, Anya. It's a legacy. You could learn a thing or two from your sister's ambition. An empire built on our childhood home, on their retirement, on the last remnants of our family's history. And they were beaming, positively glowing with the nobility of their sacrifice. Then came the final twist of the knife. Melody leaned forward, a benevolent queen bestowing a great favor upon a lowly subject. Actually, Anya, I have a proposition for you. Since you're between jobs and probably struggling, she paused for dramatic effect. I'd like to offer you a part-time job. A job? Yes, cleaning the studios, evenings. It would really help me out, and honestly, you could use the cash. I'll even give you a family discount on the hourly rate. We'll pay you $9 an hour instead of the usual $8. The room fell silent. They all looked at me, expecting gratitude. They were offering me the chance to scrub the floors of the kingdom they'd built on the rubble of my dreams, to polish the mirrors that reflected her success, financed by my loss. The humiliation burned like acid in my throat. It was a physical, searing pain. I looked at Melody's smug face, my father's stern approval, my mother's hopeful smile. And I smiled back. A sweet, gentle, broken little smile. Thank you, Melody, I whispered. I'd love to. Thank you so much. My new uniform was a pair of stained sweatpants and an old t-shirt. My new instrument was a mop. I began my tenure as the janitor of Melody's dance dynasty the following Monday. I kept my head down, my expression vacant. I was a ghost haunting the halls of my sister's success. The work was humbling, but the emotional labor was excruciating. I scrubbed the toilets while the saccharine notes of Tchaikovsky drifted from the dance floor. I wiped down the mirrors, my own reflection a blurry, pathetic figure in the background as Melody, sharp and commanding, guided her students through their plies and arabesques. Parents would see me and offer me sad, pitying smiles. It's so good of Melody to help you out like this, one of them said to me as I emptied a trash can full of used-up athletic tape and empty water bottles. I just nodded gratefully. Sarah, my former best friend, was particularly cruel. She'd walk by me as I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing a scuff mark off the floor. It's amazing what a little hard work can do for your perspective, she'd say with a saccharine smile. Some people just need a little help getting back on their feet. I took it all. I absorbed their pity, their condescension, their smug self-satisfaction. I played the role of the grateful, defeated sister to perfection. I was meek. I was quiet. I was invisible. And that was exactly what I wanted, because my real work began after everyone else had gone home. Late one night, under the guise of deep cleaning the main office, I started my real mission. Melody was careless, arrogant. She assumed no one would ever dare to look. But I was looking. I tried the handle on her file cabinet. Locked. I tried her desk drawers. Locked. But then I remembered the small framed photo of her on the wall, the one where she was accepting some award. It was slightly crooked. On a hunch, I took it down. Taped to the back was a small silver key. Bingo. It didn't open the file cabinet. It opened the safe hidden behind a loose floorboard under her desk. And inside that safe was her entire kingdom. Not just the doctored books I'd glimpsed before, but the real ones. 2 sets of ledgers. One for the IRS, one for her. The scholarship fund was a complete sham. Donations were funneled directly into a personal account. She was embezzling, committing massive tax evasion, and I had it all right in front of me. My late-night cleaning sessions became reconnaissance missions. My smartphone, a top-of-the-line model hidden away from my family, became my weapon. Night after night, I meticulously photographed every single document in that safe. The dual ledgers, the offshore account numbers, the list of scholarship donors cross-referenced with Melody's personal credit card statements, showing lavish purchases made on the exact same dates as large donations. This wasn't just about my piano anymore. This was about a systemic, calculated fraud that preyed on the goodwill of our entire community. With a mountain of digital evidence, I began to position my chess pieces. I used a secure, untraceable email service and a VPN routed through 3 different countries. My first move was an anonymous tip to the IRS. I didn't send them everything at once, just a taste. A single, damning spreadsheet showing the discrepancy between donated funds and declared income. I attached a note. Look into the Melody's Dance Dynasty Scholarship Fund. More to follow. My next move was more personal. It was for Sarah. While dusting her office, I used a small USB drive to upload a piece of sophisticated software onto her computer. It was designed to slowly corrupt specific files, but more importantly, it mimicked the digital signature of a known piece of malware and created a false trail leading back to an IP address in Eastern Europe. Then, I planted a single, beautifully forged document in a deep folder on her hard drive, a fake letter from her to Melody outlining a plan to skim money from the business. It was my own little creative composition. I was back in my dumpy apartment reviewing the photos on my laptop when my burner phone buzzed. It was a text from a trusted contact in Vienna. Klaus, everything is in place for your arrival. The orchestra is buzzing. Don't let the hometown drama distract you from the music. I texted back, don't worry, the drama is the music. A few days later, while I was cleaning the staff lounge, I heard Sarah on the phone. Her voice was tight with anxiety. No, it's not just running slow. The financial projections for the expansion just corrupted themselves. And I keep getting these weird pop-ups. I think I need to call an IT specialist. Something is really wrong with my computer. The first piece was in position. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the busiest time at the studio. The waiting room was packed with parents. The studio's filled with dozens of little girls in pink leotards. Melody was in her element, striding through the lobby, accepting compliments, her laughter echoing off the lavender walls. That's when the first car pulled up, a boring government-issue sedan. 2 men in dark, ill-fitting suits got out. They walked into the studio with a quiet, unshakable purpose. They were IRS agents. Parents fell silent, watching with confused expressions. Melody's smile froze on her face. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a little too high. "Are you Melody Anderson?" the lead agent asked, flashing his badge. "We have a warrant to seize financial records pertaining to an investigation into tax fraud." Before Melody could even process what was happening, a second vehicle arrived. A white van with the Channel 8 News logo emblazoned on the side. A reporter and a cameraman hopped out, their camera already rolling. They must have gotten their own anonymous tip. Panic erupted. The agents were professional, efficient, moving into the office and beginning to carry out boxes of files. Parents started grabbing their children, their faces shifting from confusion to suspicion. "What's going on?" one mother demanded. "What scholarship fraud?" Sarah burst out of her office, her face pale. "It's not us. It must be the bookkeeper. He must have made a mistake," she stammered, already looking for a scapegoat. The news reporter shoved a microphone in Melody's face. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her face, usually a mask of smug confidence, was a mess of shock and terror. "Miss Anderson, can you comment on the allegations of embezzling from your own scholarship fund?" I was in the back hallway, holding a broom, watching the whole beautiful disaster unfold. I watched the kingdom begin to teeter. As Melody stumbled away from the cameras, her eyes wild with panic, I pulled out my burner phone and sent a single anonymous text to her number. "This is just the beginning." The emergency family meeting was held at my parents' house, the one that was now on the market. The for sale sign on the lawn felt like a tombstone. The atmosphere inside was frantic, toxic. "Someone is trying to destroy me," Melody sobbed, pacing the living room floor. Her designer workout clothes were rumpled, her face streaked with mascara. "This is a targeted attack, a sabotage." Sarah was there too, wringing her hands and pacing in the opposite direction. The IT guy found malware on my computer. Someone hacked me. They planted things. Mom was clutching a rosary, her lips moving in a silent, desperate prayer. Who would do this to us? Who could be so cruel? Dad slammed his fist on the coffee table, making the porcelain figurines jump. Who betrayed this family? Who went to the IRS? It had to be someone on the inside. Their eyes darted around the room, full of suspicion and paranoia. They looked at Sarah, at each other, at the walls. And then, their gazes fell on me. I was sitting quietly in the corner, looking small and scared. Anya, Mom said, her voice trembling, you're at the studio all the time. You clean the offices. Have you heard anything? Seen anything suspicious? They looked at me with desperate eyes. They were turning to me for help, for information, for comfort. But they still saw the same person they had always seen. The insignificant, failed musician. The janitor. They had no idea they were talking to the architect of their ruin. No, Mom, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I just cleaned the floors. I don't see anything. Just then, Melody's phone rang, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the tension. She snatched it up. It's my lawyer, she choked out. She listened for a moment, her face going from pale to ashen. What is it? Dad demanded. Melody lowered the phone, her hand shaking. That was just the IRS, she whispered, her voice cracking. The local news story. It got picked up by the state wire. The Attorney General's office is opening its own investigation. The cracks were becoming chasms, and they were all about to fall in. The legal fees were piling up faster than autumn leaves. The initial investigation had frozen Melody's business accounts, and the family's savings were dwindling. Desperation had set in, a sour, pungent odor that clung to them like cheap cologne. It was during another fraught, whisper-filled family meeting that they played their next card. We have to sell my jewelry, Mom announced, her voice heavy with martyrdom. The good pieces. The diamond earrings your father gave me for our 25th anniversary. The sapphire necklace. Dad nodded grimly. It's the only way to retain a decent lawyer. We have to fight this. Melody, whose stress had sharpened her features into a cruel mask, was rifling through a dusty box of old keepsakes from the attic. What about this? She snapped, pulling something out. My blood ran cold. It was my grandmother's music box, a beautiful antique piece made of inlaid mahogany, a gift for her 16th birthday. It was the only thing I had left of her, the only tangible piece of my musical inheritance. When she died, she had left it to me specifically in her will. After they sold the piano, I'd hidden it away, but they must have found it when they were packing up the house. We could get a few hundred for this at least, Melody said, examining it with a cold, appraising eye. Melody, no, I whispered. It was an involuntary reaction. She whipped her head around, her eyes flashing with viciousness. Why not? It's not like you play music anymore anyway, is it, Anya? It's just a box. It's just sitting there, collecting dust, while my life falls apart. Your grandmother wanted me to have it, I managed to say, my voice shaking. Grandma's dead, Melody retorted, her cruelty breathtaking, and the living have bills to pay. They didn't even argue, they just agreed. They scheduled a yard sale for the upcoming weekend, pricing my childhood memories, our family heirlooms, at garage sale rates. They weren't just selling off their assets to save themselves, they were stealing from the dead. And the betrayal this time felt deeper, sharper, a deliberate desecration of memory. The day of the yard sale was gray and overcast, a perfect, pathetic fallacy. I helped them carry boxes out to the lawn, my hands trembling as I handled precious items. My father's old fly fishing rods, my mother's wedding china, my own collection of classic novels, their pages soft and worn. I moved like a zombie, my face a mask of quiet grief. I watched neighbors and strangers paw through our history, haggling over prices with my desperate-looking parents. Will you take $5 for this? A woman asked, holding up a framed photo of my grandparents. Then I saw it. A man with a greasy ponytail and a stained t-shirt picked up my grandmother's music box. He opened the lid, and the tinny, delicate melody of a Chopin waltz filled the air. It was the song she used to hum to me. How much for the box? He grunted at my father. $30, Dad said, his voice strained. The man laughed. I'll give you 10. Please, I whispered to my father. Not that. We need the money, Anya, he hissed back, refusing to look at me. They haggled for another minute before Dad, his pride visibly crumbling, agreed to $15. Melody, standing by the cash box, counted the crumpled bills with a look of grim relief. She glanced over at me and saw the tears welling in my eyes. I let them fall, turning away and wiping them with the back of my hand. I wanted them to see my pain. I wanted them to register it, to file it away as another example of my weakness, my sentimental attachment to useless things. I played the part of the wounded deer, helpless and heartbroken. As the man with the ponytail walked away with my treasure, a new figure approached the sale. A woman, sharply dressed in a tailored business suit, looking utterly out of place. She walked directly to my father. You have some items listed in a private online ad, she said, her voice crisp and professional. An antique music box, a set of china, and some fishing equipment. I believe the total asking price was $2,750. My parents and Melody stared at her, dumbfounded. That was the exact, to the dollar, amount their lawyer had demanded as a retainer that morning. Yes, my father stammered, but the music box, I just sold it. The woman smiled thinly. Don't worry, she said, opening her purse. I've already recovered it. The gentleman was happy to part with it for $20. She handed my father a thick envelope of cash. Here is the agreed-upon amount. My family stood there, stunned into silence, clutching the money that felt like a divine intervention. The next evening, I went to my parents' new, cramped apartment for dinner. The air was lighter. The money from the mysterious buyer had given them a sliver of hope. It was a miracle, my mother kept saying, an angel sent to help us. After the meal, I placed a small, beautifully wrapped box on the table. I have something for you, I said softly. A housewarming gift. My mother opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of silk, was my grandmother's music box. They stared at it, then at me. Their faces were a kaleidoscope of confusion, shock, and dawning horror. The buyer, my father whispered. The woman in the suit? She works for me, I said quietly, my voice devoid of all its previous meekness. I was the anonymous buyer. I bought back everything you were so desperate to sell. The mask was off. The era of appearing passive was over. How? Melody breathed. The money. Where did you get money like that? I've been busy for the last 15 years, I said, leaning back in my chair. While you were building your little dynasty on lies, I was building a career. I let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. And I've been busy since I got back to town, too. I pulled a thin file from my bag and slid it onto the table. I hired a private investigator a few weeks ago, a very good one. He's been looking into all of you. I tapped the file. He found some interesting things. For example, the repeated safety violations at your studios, Melody. Overcrowded classes, uncertified instructors. I took the liberty of forwarding that information to the parents' committee that's been forming. I expect they'll be filing a lawsuit for endangerment shortly. I turned to Sarah, who had also been summoned and was looking greener by the second. He also found your offshore accounts, Sarah, the ones you didn't tell Melody about. I sent that information to your biggest investors, the ones you called mysterious. They weren't so mysterious to my PI, they pulled their funding this afternoon. Then I looked at my father. My voice dropped. And Dad, he found your online gambling accounts, the ones you've been using to bleed money for years. The ones that explain why this family was really in a tough spot all those years ago when you sold my piano. It wasn't just for Melody's tuition, was it? The color drained from his face. My phone rang. It was a restricted number. I answered it, putting it on speaker. Yes? Miss Petrova, a gravelly voice said. It's Markuson. The PI, I have the information you requested about your father's finances. It seems he not only has significant gambling debts, but he also took out a second mortgage on the family home 2 years ago without his wife's knowledge. The house you just sold? Most of that money won't be going to Melody's lawyers. It's going straight to the bank. I clicked off the phone and looked at my mother's devastated face. The puppet master had just cut their strings. The fallout was swift and brutal. It was a controlled demolition. The investors, a powerful real estate consortium, not only pulled their funding from Melody's national expansion, but also initiated legal action to recoup their initial seed money, citing gross financial mismanagement. The parents' boycott was immediate. Fueled by anonymous emails containing photos of frayed safety mats, lists of instructors with expired certifications, and copies of the fire marshal's warnings, they pulled their children from the studios en masse. The dance dynasty became a ghost town overnight. The local newspaper, which had once celebrated Melody as a hometown hero, now ran a front-page exposé with the headline, "Dance Dynasty Built on Deception and Family Betrayal." My PI had leaked select non-incriminating details from his report, painting a picture of negligence and greed. Sarah's world imploded. When her husband discovered not only her role in the financial crimes, but also the secret offshore accounts she'd hidden from him, he filed for divorce and went straight to the district attorney with everything he knew to secure a better deal for himself. The final act of this particular drama took place, fittingly, at another family dinner, or what was left of one. They were all there in the cramped apartment, the air thick with the smell of burnt microwave popcorn and despair. They were arguing, their voices raw and shrill, when there was a sharp knock at the door. My father opened it to find a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit. "Melody Anderson? Robert Petrova?" he asked, holding a stack of papers. "You've been served." He handed them sheaf after sheaf of legal documents. Lawsuits from the investors, a class action suit from the parents, a notice of intent to sue from Sarah's estranged husband. The foundation of their lives had not just crumbled, it had been pulverized. It was almost comical. A week later, they showed up at my door. My tiny, shabby, one-room apartment that I had rented specifically for this performance. The three of them, Mom, Dad, and Melody, stood there looking lost and broken. "Anya, please." Melody was the first to speak. Her face was sallow, makeup streaked down her cheeks. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple drab sweatsuit. "You have to help us. We'll lose everything." She promised to make things right, to pay me back, to do whatever it took. Mom clutched my hands. Her own were cold and trembling. "We know we made mistakes, Anya," she sobbed finally, after 15 years, admitting some semblance of fault. We may have made a mistake in the past. We chose wrong, but we can fix this, as a family." Dad, his pride shattered, his secrets exposed, couldn't even look at me. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Do you have any savings?" he mumbled. "Anything at all. We could borrow it, just until we get back on our feet." The irony was so rich it was practically a dessert. As if on cue, there was a frantic pounding from down the hall. It was Sarah. She looked wild, her hair a mess, her eyes darting around nervously. "Anya, please," she begged, pushing past my parents. "I'll do anything. I'll testify against Melody. I'll tell them everything. She manipulated me. She forced me into it." They were a chorus of desperation, a symphony of ruin, all performing in the cramped entryway of my fake life. They were begging the janitor to save the kingdom she had single-handedly destroyed. As they all started talking at once, a new sound cut through the chaos. It started faintly, then grew louder, a familiar sound from 1,000 movies, but one I'd never heard directed at my family. The sound of police sirens wailing in the distance, growing closer and closer. They all froze, their begging turning to pure, primal fear. They had one move left, the scorpion's sting. In their final, desperate death rattle, they decided to take me down with them. It was a coordinated last-ditch effort to frame me for their crimes. It started with a call from a frantic Melody to the police, claiming her emotionally unstable sister had finally confessed to everything. At the same time, using the key they still had to my apartment, my father slipped in while I was out buying groceries. He planted the evidence, a stack of forged bank statements in my name, a notebook filled with my handwriting meticulously faked to outline the embezzlement scheme, and the burner phone I had so carelessly left behind, now wiped of my contacts and filled with text messages from me to a fake co-conspirator. The final piece was Sarah. In exchange for a promise of leniency from Melody's beleaguered lawyer, she provided a false, tearful testimony to the lead detective. She claimed I had approached her months ago, consumed by jealousy, and masterminded the entire plot to steal the scholarship money and ruin my sister. Melody, ever the performer, gave a heart-wrenching interview on the courthouse steps, tears streaming down her face. My sister. She's always been troubled. She sobbed to the cameras. I love her, but she's been sabotaging me out of jealousy for years. This was her plan all along. I'm the victim here. The police arrived at my apartment that evening. This time, the sirens weren't for them. Two uniformed officers, a man and a woman, stood grimly in my doorway. Anya Petrova, the male officer said, "You're under arrest on suspicion of embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy." They handcuffed me in my own living room. As they led me out, I saw my neighbors peeking through their blinds, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The humiliation was absolute. It was their checkmate, or so they thought. The interrogation room was exactly like it is in the movies, small, gray, and smelling of stale coffee and fear. I sat at the metal table, my hands cuffed in front of me. I let my shoulders shake. I looked shocked, betrayed, and utterly broken. I was the lamb being led to the slaughter. The lead detective, a tired-looking man named Miller, slid a file across the table. "Your sister tells a compelling story," he said, his voice flat. "Your friend Sarah corroborates it. And the evidence we found in your apartment? It's pretty damning." I stared at the forged documents, the fabricated confession in my own faked handwriting. I don't understand," I stammered, playing the part of the struggling music teacher who couldn't possibly orchestrate a complex financial crime. "Melody, Sarah, they're lying. Why would they do this?" Tears, real tears this time, of rage, not sadness, welled in my eyes. I let them fall. I let my voice crack as I talked about my love for my sister, my confusion, my hurt. I was vulnerable. I was fragile. I was everything they had accused me of being. "They're saying you're mentally unstable," Detective Miller said, watching me closely. "Vengeful, obsessed with your past." I buried my face in my hands, my body trembling. "I just wanted to come home," I sobbed. "I just wanted my family back." After an hour of their accusations, I finally looked up, my eyes red and puffy. Can I make my one phone call?" Miller nodded. He pushed the phone towards me. I dialed a number from memory, a long, international number. "Hello?" a man's voice answered with the distinct Austrian accent. "Klaus," I said, my voice still shaky, but with an underlying code he would understand. "It's me. There's been a family emergency, a big one. I need you to activate the trust." "Consider it done," he replied, his tone all business. I hung up. Miller was looking at me, a flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, in his tired eyes. His gaze dropped to my wrist where my sleeve had ridden up during my performance. He noticed the watch I was wearing. It was a Patek Philippe Calatrava, a simple, elegant, and astronomically expensive timepiece. It was a gift from the board of the Berlin Philharmonic, and it did not in any way match the story of a $9 an hour janitor. The first inkling that the game had changed came less than an hour later. A woman in an impeccably tailored, brutally expensive suit strode into the police station as if she owned it. She was flanked by two equally imposing men. "I am Elizabeth Sterling," she announced to the front desk sergeant, her voice like ice. "I am legal counsel for Miss Anya Petrova. Take me to my client. Now." Detective Miller's jaw tightened when Sterling entered the interrogation room. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I'm the person who is about to make your life very difficult," she said, placing a heavy briefcase on the table. My client's phone call was not to her cousin. It was to Klaus Richter, the managing director of the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, where my client is currently the principal concert pianist. She snapped open the briefcase. "Let's dispense with the fiction, shall we, detective?" She laid out the documents one by one. First, my real passport. It was thick with visa stamps from every major cultural capital in the world. London, Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, Milan, Prague. Next, she produced my bank statements. Not the forged ones my father had planted, but the real ones, showing millions of dollars in earnings from concert fees, exclusive recording contracts with Deutsche Grammophon, and a portfolio of investments managed by a top Swiss firm. The struggling music teacher who came back to town in a beat-up Honda? Sterling continued, her voice dripping with contempt. That was a role, a performance, if you will, an elaborate disguise to allow my client to return to her hometown undetected and observe the family who betrayed her 15 years ago. She slid a laminated ID card across the table. It showed my picture, my real name, and my official title. Cultural attaché with the Austrian consulate. And one more thing, Detective. My client has been granted diplomatic status for her work in promoting international arts. Which means this entire arrest, she paused, letting the words land with devastating weight, is illegal. Miller stared at the documents, then at me. The meek, crying girl was gone. I sat up straight, my expression calm, my eyes cold. The lamb had taken off her fleece, and underneath she was a wolf. My release was immediate. My high-powered legal team, flown in from New York on a private jet, saw to that. Detective Miller, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning dread, personally unlocked my handcuffs. His demeanor had shifted from bored authority to horrified deference. The story exploded. My lawyer, Elizabeth Sterling, held a press conference on the steps of the very same courthouse where Melody had given her tearful performance. But Sterling's conference was different. It was a surgical strike. My client, Anya Petrova, known in the classical music world as Anya Petrova, is not a criminal, she announced to a rabid pack of reporters. She is a virtuoso, a global star, and the victim of a vicious, calculated campaign of slander and fraud perpetrated by her own family. The news channels cut between footage of me performing a Rachmaninoff concerto at the Royal Albert Hall and shots of Melody's crumbling dance studio. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Local girl whose family sold her piano became international concert star returns for revenge. My family watched it from their cramped apartment. I know because a local news crew had camped outside their door. The camera zoomed in on their faces through the window, shock, horror, and utter soul-crushing disbelief as my real accomplishments, my real life, scrolled across their television screen. They had thought they were swatting a fly. They had just discovered they'd been poking a dragon. Sterling ended her press conference with a final chilling statement. My client has been fully exonerated, she said, her eyes glinting. And we are now preparing to file a number of our own charges, civil and criminal. This is far from over. Back in my new apartment, a penthouse suite at the city's finest hotel, booked under my real name, my team assembled. They have no idea what's coming, I said, sipping a glass of water. Sterling smiled. They're about to find out. The next day, we filed our countersuit. But it wasn't just based on their recent actions. It was based on 15 years of meticulous documentation. You see, I explained to Detective Miller, who had come to my hotel to personally apologize. I didn't just become a pianist. I became a record keeper. I showed him the evidence. For years, I had kept a diary. But after I was accepted to my first conservatory in Europe, it became something more. It became a chronicle. I had saved every email, every letter where they'd belittled my hobby. But the real masterstroke was the evidence I'd gathered since my return. I revealed that my shabby cardigan had a hidden microphone. My cheap glasses had a pinhole video camera. I had high-definition audio and video recordings of every single conversation. Melody admitting she'd thrown away my Juilliard letter. My father admitting they needed capital for her legacy. Sarah admitting she'd helped convince them to sell the piano. Their attempts to frame me, their admissions of guilt, their panic. It was all there. But my investigation didn't stop with their recent crimes, I continued, sliding another file across the table. My PI uncovered years of tax evasion, long before the scholarship fund. And one other thing? I pushed a final document towards him. It was a loan application for $50,000, taken out 10 years ago. The signature on the bottom was Anya Petrova. The social security number was mine. The loan had defaulted, destroying my credit for years, a fact I'd only discovered when I was old enough to need it. They used my identity to take out fraudulent loans while I was in Europe, assuming I'd never find out, I said. That's not a local matter, that's a federal crime. As if on cue, Elizabeth Sterling's phone rang. She listened for a moment and then smiled at me. They're here, she said. I looked out the penthouse window. On the street below, two dark sedans with government plates pulled up in front of my parents' apartment building. Men in dark suits with FBI jackets emerged. The story went international. It was a media firestorm. The Cinderella Revenge, one British tabloid called it. The Pianist's Gambit, a French paper dubbed it. My face was everywhere, a symbol of quiet, long, simmering vengeance. Melody's dance dynasty collapsed completely. The last few remaining staff members quit. The for sale signs on the studios were replaced with bank-owned placards. Sarah's attempt to flee the country was stopped at the airport. My legal team had already worked with the DA to have her assets frozen. She was taken into custody, her face a pale, tear-stained mask on the evening news. My parents were evicted. The bank had taken the house, and with the FBI investigation into the fraudulent loans, all their other assets were seized. They were left with nothing. Melody, out on bail, held one last, disastrous press conference. It was a complete meltdown. She raved about jealousy, about my sick, twisted mind, about how I had stolen her life. She looked unhinged. The clip went viral, becoming a meme, a symbol of epic, public downfall. Her career, her reputation, her entire identity were incinerated in the space of 3 minutes. The empire hadn't just fallen, it had been erased from the map. The request came through her lawyer. Melody wanted to see me. I agreed. The county jail smelled of disinfectant and despair. We sat across from each other at a metal table, a thick pane of plexiglass between us. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame, a frame that had once carried itself with such arrogant, athletic pride. She was a wraith, a hollowed-out version of the sister I had once known. "Anya," she began, her voice a dry rasp. Tears were already streaming down her face. She didn't even try to hold them back. "I'm so sorry." I waited, silent. "It's true," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the table. "All of it. I threw away your letter from Juilliard. I begged them to sell the piano. I couldn't stand it." She finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine through the glass. "I was jealous. I was so jealous of you. You had it, the real thing, the talent. All I ever had was ambition and mom and dad telling me I was special, but you were special, and I hated you for it. It was the confession I had waited 15 years to hear. The validation that I wasn't crazy, that the injustice had been real." She talked for 10 minutes straight, admitting everything, every cruel word, every sabotage, every lie. When she was finished, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion. She reached a trembling hand out and pressed her palm against the plexiglass. A plea for connection. A plea for forgiveness. I just looked at her hand, then back at her face. I said nothing. My parents found me at my hotel. They had gotten past the front desk by claiming it was a family emergency. They looked like they had aged 10 years and 10 weeks. They stood in the middle of my sprawling suite, looking small and defeated. Dad's hands were shaking as he placed my grandmother's music box on the marble coffee table. He had somehow gotten it back from the police evidence locker. It was their peace offering, their white flag. "Anya," Mom's voice broke, "we know we failed you. We know we were wrong. We chose wrong. We see that now." The room filled with the faint scent of her vanilla perfume, the same scent that had once meant comfort, that had filled the air the day they told me my piano was gone. It was a ghost in the room. "Please," she begged, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. "Don't do this. She's still your sister." They offered me everything they had left, which was nothing but words. Public apologies, signed confessions admitting to the fraudulent loans to lessen my legal burden. They would give me their remaining meager assets, if any were ever unfrozen. They would do anything, they said, if I would just show Melody some mercy. The final visitor was Sarah. She arrived with her lawyer, a harried-looking man who clearly knew he was on the losing side. She looked just as broken as Melody, but her desperation was sharper, more conniving. "Anya, I will testify against all of them," she said, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "I will tell the DA everything. I will detail the entire conspiracy, from the very beginning, to destroy your musical career. I can prove Melody planned it all." She claimed she was a victim too. manipulated by Melody, forced to participate against her will because Melody held some long-forgotten high school secret over her head. It was a pathetic, transparent lie. "I'll give you half of my remaining assets," she pleaded. "I'll make a public statement clearing your name completely. I'll do whatever you want." Her lawyer nodded. "My client is prepared to cooperate fully." Then Sarah leaned forward, her eyes wide. "And there's something else, something I've never told anyone, about the piano sale." I raised an eyebrow. "We told you we got $3,000 for it," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Just enough for Melody's first year of tuition. That's a lie. The buyer I found, he was a collector. He knew it was a pre-war Steinway. He paid us $30,000 for it. They used 3 for Melody's lessons and kept the rest. They bought a new car. They redid the kitchen. They took a vacation to Hawaii." She looked at me, expecting shock, outrage, expecting this final grotesque betrayal to be the thing that made me side with her against them. I listened to each of them, to Melody's tearful confession, to my parents' desperate pleas, to Sarah's self-serving bargain and her final ugly secret. I listened with the same serene composure I held on stage before a performance, my hands folded calmly in my lap. When they were all done, when all their words and tears and bargains hung in the air, I looked at each of them in turn. My parents and Sarah were gathered in my suite, a final, desperate delegation. I had seen Melody earlier. Now it was their turn. I looked at Sarah first. "The money from the piano doesn't matter." I looked at my parents. "Your apologies are 15 years too late." Then I looked at all of them, my voice as clear and resonant as a single, perfectly struck note in a silent concert hall. No. It was not an angry no. It was not a vengeful no. It was a calm, simple, and absolute no. A fact. A closing of a door. A final chord. No forgiveness, no deals, no family reconciliation, no mercy. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where they had tried to bury me. "You taught me a very important lesson," I said, my back to them. "You taught me that love can be conditional. You taught me that ambition can be poison. You taught me that family is just a word, not a guarantee. You taught me that some sacrifices are just theft in disguise." I turned back to them, and for the first time in their presence, I gave them a genuine, gentle smile. It was the coldest thing they had ever seen. "I learned my lessons well. I became everything you told me was impossible," I said softly. "I built a life, a real one, not the hollow facade you constructed. I succeeded beyond your wildest, most envious dreams." I paused, letting the truth of it settle in the silent room. "And you will never, ever be a part of it." I pressed a small button on the hotel phone. "Security, please," I said into the receiver. "My guests are ready to leave." 2 uniformed security guards entered the suite. They gently but firmly escorted my parents and Sarah out of the room. My mother was openly sobbing. My father looked like a ghost. Sarah just looked numb. As the door clicked shut behind them, sealing them out of my life forever, I returned to the grand piano that sat in the corner of the suite. I sat down and began to review the sheet music for my performance tomorrow night. My phone rang. It was Klaus from Vienna. "Anya, my dear," he said, his voice warm. "I have just spoken with the board. They have approved your proposal. The new conservatory. It is yours. How does the Petrova Academy of Music sound?" I closed my eyes, a real, unforced smile spreading across my face. A new beginning. A new legacy. One that I would build myself. The lights of Carnegie Hall warmed my face. 2,000 people held their breath, a collective silence hanging in the historic space. My fingers, steady and sure, danced across the ivory keys, playing the final, soaring notes of my own original composition. It was a piece full of struggle, loss, and ultimate, quiet triumph. I had titled it, simply, "The Piano I Never Had." When the last note echoed and faded into silence, the hall erupted. The sound was a tidal wave, a standing ovation that washed over me, a validation far more profound than any confession. I bowed, my heart full, not with vengeance, but with music. Backstage, my dressing room was a jungle of flowers. Bouquets from admirers, from conductors, from fellow musicians all over the world. There were no flowers from my family. There never would be again. On my dressing table, next to a bottle of champagne, sat my grandmother's music box. I wound it up, and its delicate melody filled the small room. It was my traveling companion now, a reminder not of what I had lost, but of what I had reclaimed. I stepped out onto the small balcony overlooking Manhattan. The city lights twinkled below me, a vast, glittering keyboard waiting to be played. The Petrova Academy of Music opened its doors a year later. It wasn't a kingdom built on lies, but a sanctuary built on passion. My first act was to establish a scholarship fund, a real one, for gifted young musicians from financially struggling families. We didn't just cover tuition. We provided instruments, housing, and a living stipend, removing every barrier so all they had to do was create. Our first recipient was a teenage pianist named Maria. Her talent was raw and immense, and her parents worked 3 jobs between them just to afford her weekly lessons on a worn-out upright. The day we surprised her with a brand new Steinway concert grand for her practice room, her tears of joy healed a part of me I didn't even know was still wounded. I'd often walk through the student lounge, the air thick with the aroma of coffee and the murmur of young artists collaborating, arguing, and dreaming together. This was the family I had chosen. This was the legacy I was building. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the academy. The postmark was from my old hometown. For a fleeting second, my heart seized, but the handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, young. The letter was from a 16-year-old girl named Lily, David's daughter. My high school crush's little girl, the one who used to take lessons at Melody's studio. She had found my story online, read the articles, and listened to my performances on YouTube. She confessed that she had been secretly teaching herself piano for the last 2 years, using an app on her phone because her parents, after the Melody fiasco, had declared that all artistic pursuits were frivolous and dangerous. "Your music makes me feel like I'm not crazy for wanting this," she wrote. "It makes me feel possible." We met at a small cafe downtown, far from her parents' watchful eyes. She was bright and shy and burned with the same fire I remembered in myself. She played me a recording of a piece she'd composed on her phone, a melody full of longing and hope. Her eyes, so much like her father's, shone with a passion that was achingly familiar. I offered her a full, secret scholarship to my academy's summer program. I offered her private lessons, mentorship, a safe place to let her music grow. In her, I saw a chance to break the cycle, to nurture a talent that her family, in their own fear and ignorance, might have tried to suppress. It was a quiet, personal, and far more satisfying form of victory. My life became a whirlwind of beautiful moments, a montage of thriving, performing at the Sydney Opera House, the scent of eucalyptus in the air. A rainy afternoon in London before playing at the Royal Albert Hall, composing new music in a mountain cabin in Switzerland, the crisp alpine air clearing away the last traces of my hometown's poison. I collaborated with musicians who became my chosen family, our bonds forged in the universal language of shared artistry and mutual respect. We didn't need blood to be loyal. We had harmony. My phone stayed blissfully silent. All numbers connected to my past had been blocked years ago. They had become ghosts, and I no longer believed in them. I bought a house in Malibu, a modern structure of glass and wood perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. Most evenings, I would sit at the silent keyboard of my grand piano on the deck, not playing, but just letting my fingers rest on the keys. Muscle memory would play my grandmother's favorite lullaby in my mind, a silent song just for me. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and freedom, and it had long since washed away any lingering bitterness. I had photo albums, thick with pictures of my travels, my friends, my students, my life. There were no family pictures. They were not part of this story. I raised a glass of deep red wine, the crystal catching the last rays of the setting sun as it bled across the ocean. I toasted the girl I used to be, the one they tried to bury. She hadn't died. She had just been hibernating, waiting for her moment to rise. A documentary about my life and my family's downfall, using the video and audio I had secretly recorded, won an Emmy. The story wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about resilience. It inspired thousands of young artists facing opposition from their own families. The book I wrote, a memoir, became a bestseller, and all the proceeds went to funding music programs in underserved communities across the country. My former students were now beginning to have their own careers, performing on world stages, and sometimes in their concert programs, they would write a small thank you to their mentor, Anya Petrova. My grandmother's music box sat on my grand piano, finally home. It was surrounded by the music it was always meant to inspire. Its quiet, tinny melody a counterpoint to the grand symphonies of my life. They sold my piano for her dance lessons. I bought myself a symphony,